The morning sun rose slowly over the wide, empty stretches of the Arizona desert. Its golden light spread across the ranch, turning the dusty fields into a warm, quiet sea of orange and brown. The rancher, a tall, strong man in his 40s, stood at the edge of the corral looking over his cattle. His hands were rough from years of work, and his face, tanned and lined, showed the signs of a life spent under the harsh sun. He liked the quiet of these mornings, the smell of the dry grass and the soft calls of the birds. It was the kind of calm that could soothe the soul. He had lived alone on this ranch for many years. Life here was simple but hard. Every day brought new chores, from feeding the cattle to fixing fences that the wind and animals often tore down. He liked the simplicity, the routine, and the sense of control it gave him. But even with all the work, there was a loneliness that never left him. He missed having someone to share the silence with, someone who could sit by the fire in the evening and talk about anything and everything. As he walked along the edge of the field, checking the fences, a sudden faint sound caught his attention. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but then he heard it again, a soft, almost painful moan like someone was in trouble. He stopped, frozen, listening carefully. The sound came from the small cluster of trees near the creek at the far end of his property. His heart quickened. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. With cautious steps, he moved toward the sound. The tall grass brushed against his legs, and the morning air was still cool but smelled faintly of wet earth from last night's small rain. He slowed down as he reached the trees, keeping his eyes sharp. The moaning came again, low and weak, and it tugged at something deep inside him. His instincts told him this was serious. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the ground, leaning against a tree, her long, dark hair falling over her shoulders. She wore simple clothing, faded from the sun, and her bare feet were dusty. Her face was pale and her eyes were closed as she tried to take deep, shaky breaths. One hand clutched her leg just above the ankle, and he could see the dirt-streaked scrape that ran across her calf. Her moans were soft, almost whispered, but full of pain. The rancher froze. He had heard stories about strangers in the desert, and for a moment fear and caution rooted him to the spot. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or if she could trust him. His mind raced with questions. What if she was dangerous? What if she didn't want help? What if this was a trick? But as he looked at her, the fear began to melt into concern. She was small and vulnerable, and the pain in her voice was clear. She needed help. Slowly, he stepped closer, raising his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Hey, are you hurt?" he asked gently, his voice low so as not to startle her. The woman stirred and opened her eyes, revealing deep brown eyes that were filled with both fear and a quiet plea. She looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust him. Then, with a small, almost inaudible voice, she said, "Yes, it hurts." The rancher's heart tightened. He knelt down a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." "Let me see," he said softly. She flinched at his words but didn't pull away. Slowly, she extended her leg, revealing the scratch that ran from her ankle to her calf. It wasn't deep, but it was painful enough that she could barely move. He nodded, examining the wound carefully. "You need to rest. Can you walk, or should I help you?" he asked. She shook her head slightly, unable to speak. The rancher realized that even a few steps would be painful. He made a decision. Without thinking much, he reached forward and gently lifted her into his arms. Her body was light, but every movement made her wince. He murmured words of reassurance as he carried her toward the ranch, moving slowly over the uneven ground. As they walked, she finally spoke again, her voice trembling. "Thank you, stranger," she whispered. The rancher smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. Just hang on. We'll get you fixed up," he said. Her eyes softened and a small spark of relief appeared. For the first time, he saw that beneath the pain, there was courage in her. The rancher had always been a man of action, not words. He knew the desert could be unforgiving. Alone, anyone could get hurt and be in serious trouble. That's why he never hesitated to help when someone was clearly in danger. And now, with this woman in his arms, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. When they reached the ranch, he laid her carefully on a clean blanket in the shade of the barn. The morning sun was higher now, casting warm light across the wooden beams and haystacks. He fetched water and a small first aid kit he always kept handy for the ranch animals. Now it would serve a different purpose. She watched him silently, her breathing still heavy but slowing. "Are you going to help me?" she asked, her voice weak. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll take care of you. You're safe here." She nodded, and for the first time a small smile crossed her face. It was a smile of gratitude, trust, and faint relief. The rancher cleaned the wound carefully, using clean water and cloth. He applied a mild antiseptic and wrapped it gently with a bandage. She flinched slightly at first, but then relaxed as she realized he was careful and respectful. "There, it hurts," she murmured again. He nodded, understanding that pain was part of the healing process, but he did his best to ease it. While tending to her, he noticed the small details that made her human and real to him. Her hands were calloused like someone who worked with her hands, and her clothes suggested a life connected to the land. Her hair, though dusty, was thick and shiny, and her eyes, even in pain, held a depth that made him curious. He realized she was strong in ways he couldn't yet understand, and he felt a mix of admiration and responsibility. As the hours passed, the rancher continued to care for her. He brought food and water, spoke softly, and even shared small stories about his own life on the ranch. She listened quietly, occasionally nodding or offering small words. There was a silent understanding between them, a fragile trust forming in the heat of the desert afternoon. By the time the sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the barn floor, she was resting more comfortably. The rancher stood nearby, watching over her. He had acted without hesitation when he found her in pain, and now he realized how much this moment mattered. It wasn't just about helping someone, it was about human connection, compassion, and trust. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the stillness of the ranch, he understood something important. Life could be lonely and harsh, but even in the middle of nowhere, compassion could create bonds that were stronger than fear. The desert had tested them both, but it had also brought them together in a way neither expected. He didn't know who she was or how she had ended up in pain in the woods. But he knew one thing: he would not let her suffer alone. The rancher had frozen at first, unsure of what to do, but now he had chosen action over hesitation. And in doing so, he had begun a story that neither of them could have predicted, a story of trust, courage, and the fragile beauty of human kindness. As the afternoon sun began to warm the air, the rancher watched her sleep, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. The world was still wide and empty outside, but here, in this small corner of the desert, something meaningful was taking root. And though neither of them knew what the future held, they had taken the first step together, one of care, trust, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could change everything. The rancher had never cared for anyone outside of his animals before. His days were filled with work, feeding cattle, repairing fences, checking on the water troughs, and the nights were long and quiet, often spent alone in his small cabin. But now, with the Apache woman resting under the shade of the barn, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of responsibility for another person's well-being. She stirred slightly, opening her eyes as the cool wind moved through the barn. Her gaze met his, and for a moment neither spoke. The rancher noticed the tension in her shoulders and the way she pressed her injured leg lightly against the blanket. Pain was still there, but the worst seemed to have eased. "You're awake," he said softly. "How do you feel?" "Better. Little," she whispered, her voice still trembling. She winced slightly when she tried to move, and he quickly knelt beside her. "Don't try to stand yet," he said kindly. "Your leg needs time." She nodded, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and caution. He realized that trust was fragile, and he needed to earn it slowly. He handed her a cup of water and waited patiently while she drank. Her hands were small and delicate, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held the cup. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to make conversation without pressing too hard. She paused, then answered softly, "Aylin." Her voice was gentle, almost musical, and it carried a calm dignity. He repeated her name quietly to himself, as if tasting it, and nodded. "I'm Luke," he said. "Luke Harper. This is my ranch." Aylin's eyes widened slightly. "Ranch?" she asked, unsure of what to say. "Yes," Luke replied, smiling faintly. "I take care of the land and the cattle. I live here alone most of the time." She nodded slowly, her eyes observing everything. The stacks of hay, the worn wooden fences, the simple tools lying around. It was clear she had never been in a place like this before. As the day went on, Luke carefully tended to her wound again, cleaning it gently and rewrapping the bandage. Aylin winced once or twice, but she didn't pull away. There was a silent understanding that he would be careful, that his touch was meant to help, not harm. Luke spoke softly all the while, telling her small things about life on the ranch. How the cattle sometimes wandered, how the horses loved the open fields, how the desert could be both harsh and beautiful. Aylin listened quietly, her curiosity slowly growing. "You live here alone?" she asked after a while. Luke nodded. "Yes, it's a quiet life. Hard sometimes, but simple. I like it." He looked at her carefully, noticing the way she flinched when a loose board creaked under the barn. "Have you been alone like this?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes," she whispered. Her eyes fell to the blanket. "I travel sometimes with my people, but I was gathering herbs near the creek, and I fell." Her voice shook slightly as she relived the pain. Luke nodded, understanding the silence that followed. He didn't press. He simply offered her a comforting presence. As the hours passed, he moved carefully around the barn, fetching water and preparing a small meal. He didn't want her to feel helpless, but he also wanted to show that she was not alone. He placed the food near her and encouraged her to eat slowly. She looked at it, then at him, a small, uncertain smile appearing on her lips. "Thank you," she said quietly. Luke nodded and returned her smile. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm glad you're safe." The quiet of the ranch seemed to wrap around them, softening the sharp edges of the desert outside. Luke realized that the connection between them was growing, even if neither spoke much. There was a trust forming, a fragile, careful trust that had to be nurtured. And for the first time in years, Luke felt a sense of warmth he hadn't expected to feel. Later in the afternoon, Aylin asked to see more of the ranch. With his careful guidance, she sat up and slowly walked a few steps with his support. The sun was high, casting a golden light over the wide fields and distant hills. Luke watched her closely, ready to steady her if she stumbled. Her eyes widened as she took in the expanse of the land, the grazing cattle, the tall fences that stretched far into the horizon. It was a different world from the one she had known, and she seemed both curious and cautious. "You've never seen land like this?" Luke asked softly. She shook her head. "No, not like this," she whispered. There was awe in her voice, a quiet appreciation of the space, the freedom, and the beauty of the desert. Luke felt a small pride in his home, and he realized he was happy to share it, even with someone he had just met. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and orange, Luke and Aylin sat together on a large wooden bench near the barn. They didn't speak much. Words were not always necessary. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees, the distant calls of birds returning to their nests, and the soft lowing of the cattle filled the silence. In that quiet, they found comfort in each other's presence. Aylin spoke finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You helped me." "Without knowing me," she said. Luke shrugged lightly. "It's what anyone should do," he replied. "If someone is hurt, you help. That's all." She nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "It's rare," she said softly. "People, sometimes, don't help." Luke didn't answer immediately. He thought about the many people he had met over the years, some kind, some cruel. He realized that helping someone in need, especially a stranger, was not only a choice but a reflection of who he was. "I don't know why," he said finally. "I just couldn't leave you there." Aylin's gaze softened. For the first time since he found her, she seemed at ease. Evening approached and the temperature began to drop. Luke fetched a thick blanket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll be warm tonight," he said. She nodded quietly, pulling the blanket close. He could see her relaxing, her body slowly letting go of tension. It was a relief to him, too, to know that she was safe and comfortable. As night fell, the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky. The ranch felt peaceful, a world apart from the danger and loneliness that had brought them together. Luke and Aylin sat quietly, sharing the silence and the small comfort of companionship. She spoke occasionally, asking simple questions about the ranch, the cattle, and the life he led. Luke answered patiently, happy to see her curiosity and engagement. By the time the moon rose high, Aylin had fallen into a light, peaceful sleep. Luke watched her for a while, reflecting on the day's events. He had acted without hesitation when he found her in pain, and now he realized how important it was to be there for someone, even a stranger. Life could be unpredictable, but in moments like this, he understood that courage, kindness, and care could create connections that were stronger than fear or doubt. The rancher knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps more questions. But for now he was content to sit quietly, watching over Aylin as she rested. The bond between them was small but growing, built on trust, respect, and the simple act of being there for someone in need. And in the vast, quiet desert, that bond felt both precious and rare, a reminder that even in a lonely world, human connection could flourish. Luke whispered softly, almost to himself, "You're safe now. Aylin, that's all that matters." The words hung in the cool night air, gentle and steady, and though neither of them could know what tomorrow would bring, the trust that had begun to form today would guide them forward, through pain, fear, and uncertainty. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead, discovering that kindness and courage could bring people together in the most unexpected ways. The next morning, the desert sun rose slowly, casting a soft golden light across the ranch. Luke awoke early, as was his habit, but today he felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in a long time. Aylin had slept well and her breathing was steady. He could see that her leg had improved slightly, and there was more strength in her posture. The bond between them had grown, built quietly through shared experiences, small acts of care, and the unspoken understanding that they were not alone anymore. Aylin stirred on the blanket, blinking against the morning light. She stretched carefully, testing her leg with cautious movements. "Better today," she said softly, a hint of a smile crossing her lips. Luke nodded, pleased. "Good, we'll take it easy, but I think you're ready for more," he said gently. She nodded, though there was still a trace of caution in her eyes. Luke guided her through some light stretches, careful not to push her too far. "The desert can be unforgiving, but our bodies adapt if we treat them right," he explained. Aylin listened intently, absorbing his words. There was a curiosity in her that went beyond simple interest. It was a desire to learn, to understand, and to connect with the world around her. Luke found himself admiring this about her. After a quiet breakfast, Luke decided it was time to share more of the ranch with her. They walked toward the fields where the cattle grazed. The wind carried the earthy smell of the desert, mixed with the faint aroma of hay and livestock. Aylin's eyes widened as she looked at the wide open spaces, the rolling hills and the mountains in the distance. It was a world so different from what she had known, yet strangely welcoming. "They're beautiful," she whispered, gesturing to the cattle. Luke smiled. "They are. Each one has a personality. You'd be surprised how much they notice." Aylin crouched slightly, watching the animals move with curiosity. She reached out a hand, and one of the calmer cows approached her slowly. She hesitated for a moment, then touched its soft nose gently. A small laugh escaped her lips, light and pure. Luke felt a warmth in his chest at seeing her happiness. As the day progressed, Luke introduced her to more of the ranch's work. He showed her how to check the fences for breaks, how to carry water safely, and even how to guide the cattle through the fields. Aylin listened carefully, repeating each step with care. She stumbled a few times, but Luke was always nearby, steadying her with a reassuring hand. The small acts of trust built a quiet confidence in both of them, creating a rhythm of cooperation and understanding. During a break, they sat beneath a lone tree near the edge of the property. Luke brought water and Aylin drank slowly, savoring the cool relief it brought. "I never knew," she began, pausing as she searched for the right words. "I never knew a place could feel alive in this way." Luke nodded thoughtfully. "The desert has life everywhere, even when it seems empty. You just have to look carefully." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mix of wonder and respect. As the afternoon sun climbed high, a sudden commotion caught their attention. A small calf had wandered too close to the creek and stumbled into the shallow water. It bleated loudly, struggling to climb out. Without hesitation, Luke ran toward it, with Aylin following closely behind. He reached the calf first, guiding it carefully back to the dry land. Aylin watched intently, then stepped forward to help, steadying the animal as Luke worked to calm it. Together, they managed to return the calf safely to the herd. After the incident, Aylin looked at Luke with admiration. "You care for them all," she said softly. Luke shrugged, smiling. "I do. They depend on me and I depend on them. Life here is about balance, about respect for those around you." She nodded thoughtfully, understanding the depth of his words. It wasn't just about animals. It was about responsibility, compassion, and connection. qualities she had also been taught in her own way. Later, as they returned to the barn, Luke encouraged Aelin to rest. She settled on a clean blanket, her eyes reflecting both fatigue and contentment. "You've learned quickly," he said, sitting nearby. "I'm impressed," she smiled faintly. "I want to learn," she admitted. Luke nodded, understanding the courage it took for her to admit that. Her trust in him had grown, and she was willing to step into new experiences despite her pain and uncertainty. As evening approached, Luke prepared a small meal. The aroma of cooked vegetables and bread filled the barn, and Aelin's eyes lit up with appreciation. They ate quietly, occasionally exchanging small words about the day. Luke spoke gently about the animals, the land, and the lessons he had learned over the years. Aelin listened carefully, asking questions and offering small stories of her own experiences. Their conversation flowed naturally, a bridge between their different worlds. After dinner, they stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the cool desert breeze whispered through the trees. Aelin leaned slightly against Luke, her eyes taking in the vast horizon. "It's peaceful," she whispered. Luke nodded. "Yes, here, you can hear yourself think. You can feel alive in a quiet way." She smiled faintly, appreciating the simplicity of the moment. As darkness fell, the desert transformed. Stars appeared in the sky one by one, twinkling like diamonds against the deep blue. Luke and Aelin sat in silence, sharing the stillness. There was a quiet understanding between them, a connection that didn't need words. Luke realized that trust had grown into something more profound, a sense of companionship and mutual respect that was rare and precious. Aelin spoke finally, her voice soft. "I scared before. Strangers, hurt, happen," Luke nodded. "I know. But fear doesn't define us. Courage, trust, kindness, that's what matters." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and newfound strength. "You sound brave," she said simply. Luke smiled faintly, understanding that bravery was not just physical, it was emotional. The willingness to care, to trust, and to act despite uncertainty. That night, Luke helped Aelin settle on the blanket once more. He adjusted her bandage, made sure she was comfortable, and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "Sleep well," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be another day." She nodded, closing her eyes with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in days. Luke watched her for a long moment, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He thought about the journey they had shared so far. From the moment he had found her injured and alone, to the small acts of trust and care that had followed, a bond had formed. It was not just about healing her body. It was about healing the heart, building trust and creating a connection that transcended words. The ranch, the desert, and the work they shared had become a backdrop for something deeper, something neither of them could have anticipated. As he stepped outside the barn, Luke looked up at the stars. The desert was quiet, vast, and full of mystery. Yet within that emptiness, a small light had begun to shine, a light of trust, courage, and understanding. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that together, they could face anything. Aelin's trust in him had grown, and his own understanding of connection had deepened. He whispered softly to the night, almost to himself, "We'll face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." The words hung in the cool air, gentle and steady, and though the desert outside remained vast and unpredictable, within the barn, a bond had formed, a bond that promised care, protection, and friendship in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. As Luke returned to his chores, he felt a quiet joy. The day had been challenging, filled with moments of learning, courage, and small victories. Aelin had grown stronger, both in body and in spirit, and he had discovered something unexpected within himself. The deep satisfaction that comes from helping, protecting, and connecting with another human being. The night deepened, and the ranch became still. The wind whispered through the trees, the animals settled, and the stars shone brightly above. Luke knew that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new moments of trust. But for now, he was content. They had faced the day together, and that was enough. In the quiet of the desert night, Luke felt a sense of peace. The bond he shared with Aelin was fragile but real, built on courage, care, and understanding. And in a world that often seemed lonely and unforgiving, that bond was a reminder that human connection could flourish, even in the most unexpected places. The morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in soft gold and amber tones. Luke had been awake for hours, tending to the cattle and checking the fences. The ranch had a quiet energy this morning, the kind that promised clarity and calm. Aylin had slept well through the night, her breathing steady, and her leg was much stronger than it had been when he first found her. Today would be different. They both knew it. Aylin stirred on the blanket outside the barn, carefully testing her leg. She smiled faintly when she realized she could stand without help. Better, she said softly. Luke nodded, pleased. Good, you've healed well. Today we'll walk a little further, see more of the ranch. You're ready? Her eyes lit with anticipation, a small spark of confidence that had grown over the past few days. They set out together, walking through the fields, the soft crunch of the dry grass beneath their feet. Aylin moved carefully at first, but with each step her confidence grew. She began to notice details she hadn't before. The way the wind rippled through the tall grass, the gentle sway of the trees, the distant mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Luke watched her quietly, noting the subtle changes in her demeanor. She was learning to trust the land and him, and that trust had transformed into something deeper, a quiet companionship that didn't need words to exist. As they reached the far side of the ranch, they encountered a small grove of trees. The shade offered relief from the warming sun. Luke suggested they sit for a moment, and Aylin complied, resting against a sturdy tree trunk. He watched her quietly, seeing the mix of curiosity and reflection in her eyes. You've come far, he said gently. Not just with your leg, but with everything. You've grown stronger. Aylin looked down at her hands, then back at him. I learn with you, she admitted softly. Her voice carried a quiet sincerity, and Luke felt a wave of warmth. It wasn't just physical healing that had taken place, it was emotional. She had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and she had trusted him through it all. That trust had created a bond neither of them had anticipated. The afternoon passed with quiet conversation and small tasks. Luke showed Aylin how to gather some of the herbs near the grove and prepare them properly. She followed his instructions carefully, her hands steady and precise. Each action reinforced their connection, a silent understanding that they were learning from each other. Aylin shared small stories of her own traditions, her voice soft but clear, and Luke listened, fascinated. He had spent years alone on this ranch, and now he was learning about another world, its wisdom, its resilience, and its quiet strength. As the day wore on, clouds began to gather in the distance. A gentle wind picked up, signaling a possible storm. Luke and Aylin returned to the barn quickly, but not before Aylin paused to look at the wide expanse of the desert. Beautiful. Always, she whispered almost to herself. Luke nodded, understanding her sentiment. The desert could be harsh, unpredictable, even dangerous, but it was also alive, full of lessons and quiet beauty. Back at the barn, Luke made sure Aylin was comfortable. He checked her bandage and adjusted it carefully. You've done well, he said. Soon you'll be ready to return to your people if you choose. But know this, you're welcome here any time. Aylin's eyes met his, a soft gratitude shining through. Thank you, Luke, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of genuine appreciation. As evening approached, the sky was painted with shades of pink, purple, and gold. Luke suggested they sit outside to watch the sunset, and Aylin agreed. Together, they climbed a small hill that overlooked the ranch. The view was breathtaking. The wide fields stretching to the horizon, the mountains standing tall in the distance, and the sky slowly deepening into twilight. They sat side by side, the silence comfortable, filled with shared understanding rather than words. Aylin broke the silence finally. I scared before, she admitted softly. People hurt, life dangerous. Luke nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I know, he said. But courage is not the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. You've shown that courage every day since I found you. Her eyes softened, reflecting both humility and pride. She realized that the trust she had given and received had made her stronger, more confident, and more connected to the world around her. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Small points of light scattered across the vast expanse. Luke and Aelin sat quietly, watching as constellations took shape. The cool desert breeze brushed against their faces, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. There was a calmness to the moment, a sense of completion, as if the world itself had paused to witness their quiet triumph over fear and pain. Aelin turned to Luke, her voice soft. "I leave soon." "Go back at people," she said. Luke nodded, though he felt a small pang of regret. Their time together had been brief, but it had left a lasting impact on both of them. "I understand," he said gently. "But remember, you are always welcome here. The ranch, the land. They will be your refuge if you need it." She smiled faintly, appreciating the sincerity in his words. Before leaving, Aelin took a slow walk through the ranch. Touching the horses, observing the cattle, and breathing in the air, Luke followed, giving her space while staying close enough to offer help if needed. She paused by the creek, watching the water flow gently over the rocks. "Life continues," she whispered. Luke nodded. "Yes, and we carry the lessons we learn along the way. Courage, trust, care. They stay with us." As night fell, Aelin prepared to leave. Luke packed some supplies for her journey, water, food, and a small bundle of herbs she could use along the way. She accepted them gratefully. "Thank you," she said again, her voice filled with warmth. Luke nodded. "Take care, Aelin, be strong. And remember, you're not alone." She paused, placing a hand gently on his arm. Remember, always," she said. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a promise that their bond, forged through trust, courage, and care, would not be forgotten. As Aelin disappeared into the shadows of the desert night, Luke stood on the porch of his ranch, watching her silhouette fade against the moonlight. He felt a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and a quiet longing. Their time together had been short, but it had changed him in ways he could not fully describe. He realized that kindness, courage, and trust could create connections that were deeper than words, lasting far beyond the moments of fear and uncertainty. That night, Luke sat quietly beneath the stars, reflecting on the days they had shared. He remembered the moment he had first found her in pain, the small victories of trust, the laughter, the conversations, and the quiet silences that had spoken volumes. He understood now that helping someone in need was not just about immediate action. It was about creating a space where trust and understanding could grow. The desert around him was still and vast, but within that vastness something meaningful had taken root. Aelin's courage, her willingness to trust, and their shared experiences had forged a bond that could not be easily broken. Luke felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had played a role in her healing and growth, just as she had influenced him. As the moon rose higher, casting a silver glow over the ranch, Luke whispered softly, almost to himself, "We faced it together, and that is what matters." He knew that their paths might diverge from this day forward, but the trust, courage, and connection they had shared would remain with them both, guiding them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Aelin's presence had brought new light into his life, teaching him that even in solitude, connection and compassion could thrive. Luke had learned that true strength was not just physical endurance, but the courage to care, to protect, and to trust. And as he watched the stars shimmer above the quiet desert, he knew that both he and Aelin would carry these lessons with them forever. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, and safe. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant mountains stood tall and silent. Luke understood now that life's greatest moments often came unexpectedly, through small acts of trust, quiet courage, and human kindness. And though the desert outside remained unpredictable, the bond formed between him and Aelin would endure, a testament to the power of compassion and the unbreakable strength of shared humanity. In the vastness of the night, Luke felt contentment and hope. The story of the injured woman and the solitary rancher had come full circle. Fear had given way to trust, pain to healing, and strangers had become companions. The lessons they learned together were simple yet profound. Courage, kindness, and understanding could bridge worlds, create bonds, and transform lives. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Luke felt a quiet certainty. Whatever the future held, he knew that the connection he had shared with Aelin would remain, a silent, enduring bond that reminded him of the beauty of human trust and the power of one selfless act to change everything. The next morning, the desert air was crisp and clean. The sun peeked over the distant hills, casting long shadows across the ranch. Luke rose early as he always did, preparing for a day of work. But today, his routine was different. Aylin was awake now, sitting quietly on the edge of the barn, her legs still carefully bandaged. She watched him move with quiet curiosity, her dark eyes following every step he took. "Good morning," Luke said softly, noticing her gaze. She nodded, offering a faint smile. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was still a small tension in her shoulders. Luke could see that even after resting, she was wary of sudden movements. He understood. Trust was not something built overnight. It was earned step by step. "Can you walk a little today?" he asked gently. Aylin looked down at her leg and then back at him. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust herself to move without pain. "I try," she whispered. Luke nodded, moving closer to steady her. With his help, she slowly stood up, leaning lightly on his arm. Her steps were careful and deliberate. Each step made her wince slightly, but she persisted. Luke walked beside her, steadying her, silently encouraging her to keep going. Once she was able to walk without his full support, he led her through the ranch, showing her the horses and cattle. Aylin watched everything with wide eyes, absorbing the sounds and smells of the ranch life. The horses stamped their hooves as she approached, and she instinctively held out her hand, letting one gentle horse sniff her fingers. Luke smiled at the sight. There was a quiet grace in her movements, even with her injury. She seemed to take in the world with a calm attention that he had never seen before. As they walked, Luke spoke softly about the land. "The desert can be harsh," he said, "but it's also full of life if you know where to look. The plants, the animals, even the wind, it all has a rhythm." Aylin listened, tilting her head as she tried to understand his words. "It feels different," she said after a moment. "Not empty, full in a strange way." Luke nodded, glad that she could see the beauty he had come to love over the years. They reached a small creek that ran along the edge of the property. The water sparkled in the morning sun, and the soft murmur of the stream was calming. Aylin knelt carefully beside it, dipping her hands in the cool water. Luke watched her quietly, seeing her relax for the first time since he had found her. She splashed a little water on her face, and for a moment she laughed softly. It was a light, delicate sound that made Luke feel unexpectedly happy. But the peaceful morning was soon interrupted. A sudden movement in the nearby brush caught their attention. Luke's eyes narrowed, and he instinctively moved closer to Aylin. A group of wild coyotes had wandered near the creek, drawn by the scent of water and perhaps the sound of movement. They were not aggressive, but in the desert, even a small group of animals could be dangerous. Luke knew he had to act. "Stay close to me," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. Aylin nodded, stepping back slightly as he positioned himself between her and the coyotes. He knew the animals would retreat if he made himself appear larger and confident. He raised his arm slightly and stomped his boots on the ground. The coyotes paused, then slowly moved away, disappearing into the brush. Aylin let out a small breath, her eyes wide with both fear and relief. "You saved me again," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Luke smiled faintly. "It's not about saving. It's about staying safe. We protect each other here," he replied. Aylin's eyes softened. She was beginning to understand something important. That trust wasn't just about words, it was about actions. And Luke's actions had proven his care repeatedly. After the encounter, they continued their walk along the creek. Luke showed her some of the herbs that grew nearby, explaining which ones were useful for medicine and which were best left alone. Aylin listened intently, her curiosity shining through. She began to share small stories about her own life, the traditions of her people, and the ways she had learned to survive in the wild. Luke was fascinated. Though their worlds were different, he realized that they shared a quiet strength, the ability to adapt, endure, and respect the land around them. By midday, the sun was high and warm, and they returned to the ranch. Luke helped Aylin sit comfortably on the shaded porch where a cool breeze offered relief from the heat. He brought her some water and a small meal, encouraging her to eat slowly. She looked at the food with a faint smile. "Thank you," she said. "You, very kind." Luke shrugged lightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It's nothing," he said. "Just doing what's right." As Aylin ate, Luke noticed how carefully she observed everything around her. She wasn't just resting. She was learning, noticing the details of the ranch, the animals, the way he moved and worked. There was a quiet intelligence in her attention, a way of seeing the world that intrigued him. He realized that helping her wasn't just about tending a wound. It was about guiding someone through unfamiliar territory, giving them the confidence to trust themselves and the world again. The afternoon passed slowly, filled with small conversations, quiet moments, and shared work. Luke showed Aylin how to gather some of the herbs and prepare them for drying. She followed his instructions carefully, her hands steady despite the lingering discomfort in her leg. Luke watched her closely, silently admiring her focus and determination. Every small task they completed together built a bridge of understanding and respect. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Luke suggested a short walk to watch the sunset. Aylin agreed, moving carefully beside him. They reached a small hill overlooking the ranch, the wide field stretching out beneath them. The sky was a canvas of color, and the quiet of the desert seemed almost sacred. "Beautiful," Aylin whispered, her eyes taking in the view. Luke nodded. "It's my favorite time of day," he said. "Everything slows down. You can think, breathe, and just be." She smiled faintly, a small warmth in her expression. It was clear that moments like this were new to her, and she appreciated them quietly, fully present in the moment. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, a sudden noise startled them, a branch snapping in the nearby woods. Luke immediately moved in front of Aylin, his senses alert. They paused, listening. The sound was close but not threatening. A small rabbit bounded across the open field, and they both laughed quietly at their own jumpiness. The tension broke, and Luke could see that Aylin's trust in him had grown even more. The walk back to the ranch was slow, each step careful but confident. Aylin's leg was still sore, but she no longer relied on him for full support. Luke felt a quiet pride. She was stronger than she realized, and their bond had grown through shared experiences, small acts of care and moments of courage. Back at the barn, Luke helped her settle in once more. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and checked the bandage on her leg. "You did well today," he said. "You're stronger than you think." Aylin looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and humility in her eyes. "I learn," she said simply. Luke nodded, understanding that it wasn't just her body that had grown stronger. It was her trust, her confidence, and her sense of safety. As night fell, they sat quietly together, listening to the desert around them, the soft sounds of the wind, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a peaceful backdrop. Luke realized that this shared silence was just as important as words. It was a moment of connection, a quiet understanding that sometimes being present was enough. Aylin leaned slightly against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Luke did not move away. Instead, he let her stay there, offering silent support. The bond they had formed was subtle but real, built on trust, shared experiences, and the courage to face small dangers together. In the vast desert, two strangers had become allies, connected by compassion and understanding. As the stars twinkled overhead, Luke whispered softly, almost to himself, "Tomorrow will be another day, and we'll face it together." Aylin nodded in her sleep, a quiet trust in her expression. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful and safe, and though the desert outside remained vast and unpredictable, within the walls of the barn, a sense of hope and connection had begun to take root, a bond that neither of them could have imagined when the day had begun.